I'm wiping down table 7 for the 3rd time tonight, my cloth moving in mechanical circles across the already spotless marble surface, when I hear him speak in a language I haven't allowed myself to use in 5 years, and the sound of those Sicilian words rolling off his tongue with the confidence of someone who believes he's speaking in code hits me like a physical blow to the sternum, stealing the breath from my lungs and making my hands still against the cool stone. Guarda questa piccola topa patetica che corre in giro. Probabilmente non sa nemmeno contare il resto correttamente, he says with casual cruelty, his voice a dark velvet that seems to caress each syllable with the kind of disdain that comes naturally to men who've never been told no, never been denied anything, never had to bow their heads to anyone except maybe God, and even that's questionable given the way he carries himself, like he's got a direct line to the devil himself. The words translate in my head before I can stop them. Look at this pathetic little mouse scurrying around, probably can't even count the change properly. And something ancient and furious unfurls in my chest, something I've kept locked down and buried deep for so long that feeling it wake up now is like watching a sleeping dragon open one burning eye. And I know I should let it go. Should keep my head down and my mouth shut like I've been doing for 5 years, but my nonna's voice echoes in my memory telling me that Romano women don't scurry. We stride, and we certainly don't let arrogant men insult us in any language, even if acknowledging the insult means revealing secrets that could get me killed. His companion laughs, a sharp barking sound that cuts through the subtle jazz playing over the restaurant's expensive sound system, and I feel my spine straighten involuntarily, muscle memory from a different life taking over before my rational mind can stop it. Because I was raised in rooms full of men like these, men who wore violence like expensive cologne and spoke in coded languages thinking themselves so clever, so untouchable. And I learned early how to move through their world with my head high and my survival instincts sharper than the knives they carried in custom-made shoulder holsters. I should walk away, should pretend I didn't understand, should maintain the carefully constructed cover I've built over 5 years of hiding in plain sight as just another broke girl trying to make rent in a city that eats people like me for breakfast and doesn't even bother to spit out the bones. But instead I find myself turning toward table 12 where he sits like a king holding court, his 3-piece suit probably costing more than my entire year's salary, his dark hair swept back from a face that belongs on Renaissance paintings of beautiful devils. And those eyes, God help me. Those eyes are the color of midnight in Sicily. The kind of black that isn't really black at all, but rather every color mixed, together until they become something darker than darkness itself. The restaurant around us continues its expensive symphony of clinking crystal and murmured conversations. The kind of establishment where Wall Street executives bring their mistresses and wise guys bring their legitimate business associates, where the line between legal and illegal blurs like watercolors in rain. And I've been working here for 6 months, specifically, because it's the last place anyone from my old life would think to look for me, because girls like the one I used to be don't serve pasta to criminals, they marry them or get destroyed by them. There's rarely an in-between. My feet carry me toward his table before my brain fully commits to what I'm about to do, and I watch his eyes track my movement with the kind of predatory attention that makes my skin prickle with warning signals my body remembers even if I've tried to forget. Because men like him don't just look at you. They assess you, catalog you, decide in milliseconds whether you're useful or disposable, or perhaps interesting enough to play with before they break you. And I can see the exact moment he decides I'm walking over to refill his water glass, like a good little waitress who doesn't speak a word of Italian, let alone the Sicilian dialect that marks you as either old country or old money or both. Posso portarli qualcos'altro? I say in flawless Sicilian, my accent carrying the unmistakable notes of Palermo's old quarter, where my nonna grew up, and where my father learned the language from his mother, before teaching it to me in secret lessons conducted in his study while my mother thought we were discussing homework. O preferisce continuare a insultare il personale che le serve il cibo che potrebbe facilmente sputarci dentro se fosse il tipo vendicativo, che fortunatamente per lei non sono, anche se la tentazione è forte quando i clienti sono così incredibilmente scortesi. The translation flows through my mind even as I watch his face transform from smug superiority to something else entirely. something dangerous and fascinated, and entirely too focused on me. Can I get you something else? Or would you prefer to continue insulting the staff serving you food they could easily spit in if they were the vindictive type? Which fortunately for you, I'm not. Although the temptation is strong when customers are so incredibly rude. The restaurant doesn't actually go silent because most people are too absorbed in their own conversations to notice the small drama unfolding at table 12. But it feels like silence anyway. Like someone has thrown a blanket over the entire world and muffled everything except the sound of my heartbeat thundering in my ears and the sudden dangerous stillness emanating from the man whose insult I just threw back in his face with interest, and a smile sharp enough to draw blood from stone. His companion freezes with his wine glass halfway to his lips, his eyes going comically wide in a way that might be funny if I wasn't suddenly, acutely aware that I've just done something monumentally stupid, something that could get me noticed by exactly the kind of people I've been hiding from. But there's also a savage satisfaction burning in my chest because for 5 years I've been small and quiet and invisible. And for just one moment I let myself be loud, be sharp, be the girl I was before the night my world burned down, and I learned that survival sometimes means becoming someone you don't recognize in the mirror. The man, and I know exactly who he is, because you don't work in a place like Vincenzo's without learning to recognize the important players. The ones whose names get whispered in the kitchen with a mixture of fear and respect. Dante Salvatore, the youngest Don in New York's history. The man who took control of his family at 28, after a war that left bodies in dumpsters, and his enemies too terrified to speak against him. Leans back in his chair, with a movement so controlled it looks choreographed. And the smile that curves his mouth is the kind that makes smart people run in the opposite direction, because it promises things that will hurt in ways you'll remember forever. Parli Siciliano, he says, and it's not a question but an observation delivered in a voice that sounds like silk wrapped around steel, like honey poured over broken glass. And I hate that my body responds to it with an awareness I haven't felt in so long. I almost forgot what attraction feels like when it's tangled up with danger and bad decisions. My nonna would haunt me from her grave if I didn't, I reply in English this time, trying to step back from the edge I've just flung myself over, trying to return to being just a waitress having a slightly unusual interaction with a customer. But his eyes won't let me retreat. They hold me pinned like a butterfly to a board, examining every micro-expression on my face with an intensity that makes me feel stripped bare despite being fully clothed in my regulation black dress and sensible shoes. Your nonna taught you to insult paying customers, he asks, still in Sicilian, and there's amusement threading through his words now. Genuine interest replacing the cruel boredom I heard when he thought I couldn't understand him. And somehow that's more dangerous than his anger would be because angry men are predictable. But interested men, curious men who look at you like you're a puzzle they intend to solve piece by careful piece, those men are the ones who get under your skin and into your head and make you forget all the very good reasons you should stay away. She taught me not to let men disrespect me in any language, I counter, and my voice comes out steadier than I feel, carrying some echo of the girl I used to be. The one who sat at her father's table and listened to men plan empires and divide territories. The one who learned early that respect is something you take, not something you wait to be, given even men who wear suits expensive enough to feed a family for a month and think their money makes them immune to basic courtesy. His companion makes a choking sound that might be suppressed laughter or horror. I can't tell which. But Dante's expression shifts into something I can't quite read. Some mixture of surprise and approval, and a calculating interest that makes my survival instincts scream at me to apologize, to back down, to remember that I'm supposed to be nobody. Nothing. Just another invisible girl serving overpriced food to people who wouldn't notice if I disappeared tomorrow. What's your name? He asks, and this time he switches to English. His accent carrying just the faintest trace of Italy underneath the polished American inflection, and I know this is a test. Know that everything from this moment forward is going to be a test because I've caught his attention, and men like Dante Salvatore don't let interesting things go until they've thoroughly examined them from every angle and decided whether to keep them or destroy them. Alessia, I tell him, giving him my real first name because I'm apparently committed to this act of beautiful stupidity, though I swallow the Romano that should follow it because that name is dangerous. That name is a death sentence. That name belongs to a girl who died 5 years ago in a house that burned while bullets flew and blood ran like rivers across marble floors that cost more than most people's houses. Alessia, he repeats, tasting my name like wine, rolling it around in his mouth like he's memorizing the shape of it. And I watch his eyes catalog everything about me from my dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail to the small scar on my left hand, from the night I crawled through broken glass to escape the men who killed my family, though he can't possibly know that's what he's looking at. Can't possibly recognize me as anything other than an unusually bold waitress who speaks Sicilian and doesn't know when to keep her mouth shut. Can I get you gentlemen anything else? I ask, trying desperately to redirect this interaction back to normal territory, back to the safe script of server and customer that doesn't involve him looking at me like I'm a mystery he intends to unravel thread by careful thread. But Dante just smiles that dangerous smile again and shakes his head slowly, never breaking eye contact. And I feel trapped in his gaze like a rabbit who's just realized the shadow overhead belongs to a hawk. No, I think you've given me everything I need, he says, and there are layers of meaning in those words that I don't want to examine too closely. Implications that make my stomach twist with something that might be fear, or might be anticipation, or might be some toxic combination of both. For now. The for now hangs in the air between us like a promise or a threat, and I force myself to nod professionally, to turn away from his table with measured steps that don't betray the way. My knees feel like water, to walk back toward the kitchen with my head high, even though I can feel his eyes tracking every step, burning into my back with an attention that feels almost physical in its intensity. The rest of my shift passes in a blur of automatic movements and racing thoughts, my hands serving food and pouring wine, while my mind spins through the implications of what I've just done, the risk I've just taken, the attention I've just drawn to myself from exactly the kind of man I should be running from. Except there's a part of me, a part I thought I'd killed along with my old identity, that feels alive for the first time in 5 years, feels awake and alert, and almost excited despite the very real danger I've just invited into my carefully constructed life. When Dante finally leaves 3 hours later, long after his companion has departed, and most of the restaurant has cleared out, he stops at the host stand, where I'm rolling silverware for tomorrow's service, and I watch him pull out a money clip that probably contains more cash than I make in a month, peeling off bills with the casual disregard of someone for whom money is merely a tool, not a constant source of stress and carefully calculated budgets. He places $500 bills on the counter in front of me, far more than the cost of his meal, far more than any reasonable tip, and then adds his business card on top of the cash, heavy cream cardstock with his name embossed in letters that probably cost more to print than my entire stack of bills, and I stare at it like it might bite me because accepting this feels like accepting something far more significant than money. Feels like acknowledging that whatever started at table 12 tonight isn't finished, not by a long shot. For the excellent service, he says in English, his voice carrying just enough irony to let me know he's talking about something other than the food I brought to his table, and for reminding me that there are still surprises left in this city. I should refuse it, should push the money back across the counter and tell him I don't need his charity or his attention. But $500 means I can pay my rent and utilities this month without having to choose between eating and keeping the lights on. Means I can maybe finally replace my shoes that are held together with duct tape and prayers. So I take it with fingers that don't quite manage to stay steady. And I hate myself a little for the compromise even as I'm grateful for the breathing room it provides. Thank you, I manage, and it comes out softer than I intended, less professional, and more genuine. And I watch something flicker in his eyes at the change in my tone, something that might be satisfaction or might be triumph, and I realize too late that I've just given him something. Some small piece of authenticity that he'll add to his mental file of information about the mysterious waitress who speaks perfect Sicilian and doesn't back down from men who could end her with a phone call. He nods once, a gesture that somehow manages to convey both dismissal and promise, and then he's gone, walking out into the New York night with his shoulders straight and his movements graceful despite his size, and I'm left standing there with his card in one hand and his money in the other, my heart pounding like I've just survived something dangerous, or perhaps just initiated something even more dangerous than whatever I survived. It's only later, after I've closed out my register and changed out of my uniform and walked the 12 blocks to my tiny apartment because I can't afford the subway fare when I'm this close to home, that I look at the business card again under the flickering light of my bathroom that needs bulbs I keep meaning to replace. And I see that he's written something on the back in black ink that's slightly smeared like he wrote it quickly, possibly while sitting in his car, possibly while thinking about me. And the word makes my breath catch in my throat because it's in Italian and it's simple, and it's absolutely a command dressed up as a statement. Domani. Tomorrow. Tomorrow he expects to see me. Tomorrow he's planning something. Tomorrow he's not done with whatever game he started tonight when I decided to let him know that this pathetic little mouse has teeth sharp enough to draw blood, and I should be terrified. Should be packing the emergency bag I keep hidden in my closet, and using the fake passport I've maintained for exactly this kind of situation. Should be on a bus to somewhere far away before the sun rises on whatever Dante Salvatore has planned for tomorrow. Instead, I find myself standing in front of my bathroom mirror, looking at a reflection I barely recognize because my eyes are bright with something I haven't seen in them for 5 years, some spark of life and recklessness and dangerous curiosity. And I realize with a certainty that feels like inevitability settling into my bones that I'm not going to run. Not this time. Not from him. Because for one night I got to be myself instead of the ghost I've been pretending to be. And maybe that's worth whatever price tomorrow brings. Maybe that's worth the risk of being seen by someone who might recognize not just my language, but everything I've been hiding underneath my carefully constructed disguise. I set the card on my bathroom counter where I'll see it in the morning. A reminder, and a challenge, and a promise all at once. And as I finally fall into bed, with my mind still racing through possibilities and dangers, and the memory of midnight eyes that seem to see straight through every wall I've built around myself, I can't help but wonder if Dante Salvatore just became my salvation or my destruction. And the truly terrifying part is that I'm not entirely sure which outcome I'm hoping for anymore, because being safe is exhausting, and being invisible is slowly killing me. And maybe, just maybe, being seen by a dangerous man is exactly what I need to finally stop running from the girl I used to be and become whoever I'm meant to be next. The business card burns like a brand in my pocket all through my shift, and when I finally pull it out in the alley behind the restaurant where I take my breaks to escape the suffocating heat of the kitchen and the weight of too many curious glances from coworkers who somehow sensed that something significant happened last night, even though I've told no one about the encounter that's been replaying in my mind like a film stuck on loop, I notice something I missed before in my bathroom's dim lighting. There's a phone number on the back, written in different ink, from the Domani, added after the printed information in handwriting that's aggressive and bold, and somehow perfectly matches the man who wrote it. And my stomach drops because Dante Salvatore doesn't give his personal number to waitresses who insult him back. Which means he knows something, or suspects something, and either option could get me killed before I have a chance to understand what game we're actually playing here. I spend the rest of my break Googling him on my phone with its cracked screen and spotty connection, finding article after article that confirms what I already suspected, but hoped might somehow be exaggerated by the rumor mill that turns every minor player into a legend. He's not just any mafia boss. He's the boss. The man who took control of New York's underworld at 28 after a brutal succession war that left 3 rival families decimated and his own family's enemies too terrified to even whisper plots against him, the youngest Don in recent history, and possibly the most dangerous, because he combines old-world ruthlessness with new-world business acumen, and apparently has no weak points that anyone has been able to exploit in the 5 years since he took his father's chair and remade it into a throne. The articles are careful, dancing around direct accusations because libel laws exist even for alleged criminals, and because writers who get too specific about Dante Salvatore's business dealings have a habit of retracting their stories or disappearing from their bylines entirely. But I can read between the lines, can see the pattern of legitimate businesses that serve as fronts for less legitimate enterprises, can recognize the structure of an organization that's managed to avoid serious prosecution, despite everyone knowing exactly what they are, because they're smart enough to insulate their boss behind layers of deniability and loyal soldiers who would rather die than testify. There's a photo of him at some charity gala, because of course men like him donate to children's hospitals and scholarship funds, building goodwill in the community while simultaneously running operations that destroy other people's children, other people's futures. And he looks impossibly handsome in his tuxedo with a smile that probably cost his family millions in political donations to achieve, standing next to the mayor like they're old friends, which they probably are because power recognizes power, regardless of which side of the law it technically falls on. I should be researching bus schedules instead of diving deeper into information about a man I need to stay away from. Should be planning my exit strategy instead of memorizing the planes of his face in photograph after photograph. But I can't seem to stop scrolling. Can't seem to stop collecting pieces of him like I'm trying to solve a puzzle I don't even understand. And when my break ends and I have to go back inside to face another 5 hours of serving people who look through me like I'm part of the furniture, I feel strangely reluctant to put my phone away, to disconnect from this digital investigation into the man who's invaded my thoughts with the same ruthless efficiency he apparently brings to everything else in his life. Against every survival instinct screaming at me to disappear into the night, like I've done twice before when situations got too complicated or too dangerous, or when someone looked at me just a little too long with recognition stirring in their eyes. I show up to work the next day, telling myself I'm just being practical because I need this job, and running would only make me look guilty of something, would only confirm whatever suspicions might be forming in Dante's mind about the waitress who speaks Sicilian, like she was born to it, and carries herself with a posture that suggests training in deportment and self-defense that girls from normal families don't usually receive. I'm rolling silverware at the host stand, my hands moving through the familiar motions while my mind spins through contingency plans and exit strategies, when Marcus, the host who's worked here longer than anyone and sees everything that happens in this restaurant, with eyes that miss nothing despite his carefully cultivated expression of bored indifference, leans close and murmurs that Table 12 has been reserved for the evening. Special request. Just one guest. And I don't need to ask who made the reservation because I can feel the knowledge settling into my bones like a premonition of either disaster or destiny. I'm still not sure which. Dante arrives exactly at 8 o'clock, which feels somehow significant, like he's making a point about punctuality or control, or perhaps just establishing that when he says tomorrow, he means a specific tomorrow with specific expectations. And he's alone this time. No companion to witness whatever scene is about to unfold, which could mean he wants privacy for a conversation that can't have witnesses, or could mean he's confident enough that he doesn't need backup to handle one waitress who may or may not be more than she appears. He requests my section with a smile that doesn't reach his predatory eyes, those midnight depths that seem even darker tonight under the restaurant's expensive lighting that's designed to make everyone look wealthy and beautiful and slightly mysterious, and I feel my professional mask slip into place with the ease of 5 years' practice, becoming the pleasant server who doesn't remember insulting him in Sicilian, doesn't remember the way his attention made my skin burn with awareness, doesn't remember lying awake until dawn, thinking about all the ways this could go wrong, and the one dangerous way it could go right. "Good evening, Mr. Salvatore," I say in English, perfectly professional, perfectly forgettable, except he's looking at me like he can see straight through the performance to the girl underneath who's terrified and fascinated in equal measure. And I watch a smile ghost across his lips, like he's pleased I'm at least trying to maintain the illusion of normalcy, even though we both know that ship sailed the moment I responded to his insult, in the language he thought was his secret code. "Alessia," he says, my name in his mouth sounding like possession, like he's already decided I'm his in some way I don't fully understand yet. I was hoping you'd be working tonight, though I had contingency plans if you weren't, because I'm not a man who leaves important things to chance. The admission that he had contingency plans, that he would have found me regardless of whether I showed up for my scheduled shift, should terrify me more than it does. But instead I feel a strange flutter in my chest that might be fear, or might be something far more dangerous. Something that whispers he thinks I'm important enough to plan for, to pursue, to claim in whatever way men like him claim things they've decided belong to them. What follows is the most dangerous dinner service of my entire life, as he orders in Italian, and I respond in kind, falling into a rhythm that feels almost natural, despite the undercurrent of tension crackling between us like electricity before a storm. And he questions me with the skill of someone who's spent his entire life extracting information from people who don't want to give it, probing delicately at first and then with increasing pressure about where I learned Sicilian, who my family is, why a woman with my obvious education and breeding. And that word makes me flinch internally, because it means he's noticed things about me that I thought I'd successfully hidden. Is serving overpriced pasta to criminals and corrupt businessmen in a restaurant that exists in the gray space between legitimate and illegal. I deflect with practiced ease that comes from years of lying about who I am and where I came from, giving him enough truth to be believable while burying the parts that would make me his enemy, or his captive, or possibly his victim, telling him about my Sicilian grandmother, which is true, about my dead parents, which is also true, though I leave out the part about how they died and who killed them, about needing to pay rent in a city that's beautiful and brutal in equal measure, weaving a story that's 90% reality and 10% carefully constructed fiction, and I watch his eyes track every micro-expression on my face like he's cataloging which parts are true and which parts are the lies I'm telling to survive. He shares pieces of himself in return, though whether they're true or equally calculated to manipulate me I can't entirely tell. Talking about growing up in his family, where weakness meant death and showing emotion was tantamount to painting a target on your own back. About inheriting responsibility at an age when most men are still figuring out their careers and their identities. About the weight of command and the isolation of power, and the strange loneliness that comes from being surrounded by people who fear you or want to use you, but never quite manage to see you as simply human, simply male. Simply a man who bleeds when he's cut and breaks when the pressure becomes too much to bear alone. There's a rawness to some of his confessions that feels genuine. Moments when his carefully constructed mask slips just enough for me to see the person underneath the position. And I find myself responding with my own carefully edited truths, admitting that I'm tired of running from shadows even though I don't specify which shadows I'm running from. Tired of being afraid of every stranger's glance and every unexpected question. Tired of pretending to be someone smaller and simpler than I actually am, because survival has meant making myself invisible, and invisibility requires cutting away pieces of yourself until you barely recognize what's left. The tension between us shifts as the evening progresses, transforming from the predator-prey dynamic of our first encounter into something more complex, more nuanced, like we're circling each other trying to decide if we're enemies or allies, or perhaps something else entirely. Something that doesn't have a name in either English or Italian, but exists in the space between danger and desire, between self-preservation and the reckless urge to be known by someone who might actually be capable of seeing all of you and not flinching away from the darkness they find. When he reaches across the table during dessert, tiramisu that I didn't order but he insisted on, because apparently he's decided he knows what I'll like, and the presumption should annoy me more than it does, and catches my hand before I can pull it back, his fingers wrapping around my wrist with a gentleness that contradicts the strength I can feel in his grip. I freeze like a wild animal caught in an unexpected trap, and he runs his thumb across my pulse point where my heartbeat is racing fast enough to give away every secret I'm trying to keep. "You're afraid of me," he observes in Sicilian, the language somehow making the statement feel more intimate than it would in English, more invasive, like he's reaching inside my chest to examine my beating heart with his bare hands. but not in the way most people are afraid of me. Not like I might hurt you physically. More like I might see something you don't want seen, might recognize something you've been hiding, and that fear is far more interesting than simple terror could ever be. Maybe I just don't like being touched by strangers, I counter, trying to pull my hand back and failing because his grip tightens just enough to keep me pinned without causing pain, just enough to remind me that he's stronger and faster and infinitely more dangerous than I am, that my safety exists entirely at his discretion, and he could end me before I even understood what was happening. "We're not strangers, Alessia," he says, and there's certainty in his voice that makes me deeply uneasy because he shouldn't know me well enough to make that claim, shouldn't be able to look at me with such knowing intensity after one bizarre encounter and one weird dinner. We stopped being strangers the moment you responded to my insult in the language of my blood, the moment you looked at me with recognition in your eyes that goes deeper than knowing my name from newspaper articles or restaurant gossip. His words hit too close to something I don't want to examine. Some truth about the strange sense of familiarity I felt when I first heard him speak. Like my soul recognized something in him before my brain could catch up. And I realize with dawning horror that he's right. There is recognition between us. Some understanding that exists beneath the surface of our words and our careful verbal sparring. And that recognition is what makes this so dangerous because it means we're both seeing past each other's defenses to the damaged people underneath. "What do you want from me?" I ask finally, abandoning pretense because clearly he's not buying my performance anyway, and my voice comes out rougher than I intended, carrying the weight of 5 years of running and hiding and pretending to be someone I'm not. 5 years of wondering if this half-life of safety is really better than risking everything to live authentically, to be seen and known, and maybe even accepted despite all the broken pieces I'm carrying. "I want to know who you really are," he says, and his hand moves from my wrist to lace his fingers through mine in a gesture that feels shockingly intimate for a man who's basically a stranger, regardless of what he claims. "I want to know why you speak Sicilian with an accent that marks you as old blood. Why you move like someone trained in self-defense and deportment. Why your eyes carry shadows that suggest trauma you're still running from. And most of all, I want to know why every instinct I have is screaming that you're important. That meeting you wasn't coincidence, but fate or destiny or whatever word we use for the moments that change the entire trajectory of our lives. His intensity should send me running. Should trigger every alarm bell in my head that's learned to recognize danger in all its forms. But instead I find myself leaning closer, drawn by the genuine curiosity in his voice and the unexpected vulnerability of his admission. Because men like Dante Salvatore don't talk about fate or destiny, don't admit to feeling pulled toward anything they can't control or command, and his honesty demands my own in return even though giving it might be the stupidest thing I've ever done. "What if the truth is dangerous?" I whisper, and I'm not even sure what I'm asking. Whether I'm warning him that knowing me could bring him trouble or warning myself that telling him could bring me the kind of attention that ends with bodies in dumpsters and mysterious disappearances that the police don't investigate too closely. What if some secrets are better left buried because digging them up only gets people killed? "Then we'll deal with the danger together," he says, with the absolute confidence of a man who's never met a threat he couldn't neutralize or a problem he couldn't solve with sufficient application of resources and ruthlessness. Because I didn't build my empire by running from complications, and I'm not about to start now with the most interesting woman I've met in years, possibly ever, definitely since I became the kind of man people are afraid to be honest with. The moment stretches between us, heavy with potential and promise and the terrible weight of decisions that can't be unmade once they're spoken into existence. And I open my mouth to tell him something. Maybe everything. Maybe just enough truth to satisfy his curiosity without destroying us both. When his phone rings with a tone that must indicate emergency, because I watch his entire demeanor shift from intrigued suitor to deadly commander in the space between one heartbeat and the next. He answers in rapid Italian, his face going hard as he listens to whoever is reporting from the other end. And I watch the transformation with fascination and growing dread. Because this is the man people fear, This is the boss who rules an empire built on blood and loyalty, and the kind of violence that makes strong men weep. And he's terrifying and magnificent and completely focused on whatever crisis is unfolding through his phone connection. How many? He snaps, and then, where exactly? And finally, secure the perimeter and don't let anyone leave until I get there. And when he ends the call, his eyes find mine with an expression I can't fully read. Some mixture of frustration and calculation, and a concern that seems directed at me specifically. Which doesn't make sense until he says in a voice gone flat and dangerous, I need to leave. There's a situation that requires my immediate attention. But Alessia, I want you to promise me you'll stay here in the restaurant, where there are cameras and witnesses, and my people can keep an eye on you until I sort out what's happening. What's happening? I ask, my heart starting to race with a different kind of fear now, the kind that's kept me alive for 5 years by teaching me to recognize when danger is circling close, when the shadows I've been running from are closing in faster than I can move. Why would I need protection? I'm just a waitress, remember? Nobody important, nobody worth protecting or threatening. Don't, he says sharply, standing and pulling me up with him, his hands gripping my shoulders hard enough to bruise, his eyes boring into mine with an intensity that steals my breath. Don't insult either of our intelligence by pretending you're nobody, because we both know that's a lie. And right now I need you to trust me enough to stay put while I deal with a problem that may or may not be connected to you, but that I'm not willing to risk your safety to find out. Before I can question him further or demand explanations or do any of the rational things my brain is suggesting, he's gone, striding toward the exit with his phone already back at his ear, issuing commands in Italian that drift back to me in fragments about securing locations and checking surveillance and finding out who the hell is moving on his territory without permission. And I'm left standing in the middle of the dining room with other patrons starting to stare at the spectacle we've created, my mind racing through possibilities that all lead to the same terrible conclusion. Someone knows I'm here. Someone has found me despite 5 years of careful hiding. And whether they told Dante or whether he figured it out on his own, the game we've been playing just became exponentially more dangerous. And I have approximately 30 seconds to decide whether I trust him enough to stay like he asked, or whether I trust my own instincts more and run while I still can, before whatever is coming arrives and makes the choice for me in ways I might not survive. I'm halfway to the kitchen exit, my server's apron already untied, and my mind cataloging the contents of my emergency bag at home, when Marcus materializes in front of me with an expression that's far too knowing, far too alert for a man who's supposed to be just a host at an Italian restaurant. And he says quietly in flawless Sicilian that makes my blood run cold, Mr. Salvatore gave explicit instructions that you're not to leave the building, Miss Romano, and I think you'll find that every exit is currently being watched by people who are very good at their jobs, so perhaps you should sit down and have some wine while we wait for him to return and explain exactly why he's so determined to keep you alive. The use of my real last name, the name I haven't spoken aloud in 5 years, the name that marks me as the daughter of murdered parents and the heir to a legacy I've been trying to escape, hits me like a physical blow that drives the air from my lungs and makes my vision blur at the edges, and I realize with terrible clarity that Dante Salvatore knows exactly who I am, has probably known since the moment I opened my mouth and spoke in the language of our shared blood. And whatever happens next, I'm completely at his mercy, in ways I never imagined when I thought I was just a waitress flirting with a dangerous man, because the truth is so much more complicated and so much more dangerous than simple attraction could ever be. I choose the red dress because if I'm going to walk into my own execution, I might as well look like I'm not afraid of the blood. And when I catch my reflection in the restaurant window, Dante's private establishment that doesn't appear on any map or review site, the kind of place that exists only for people who know to ask for it and have the right connections to actually receive an address, I barely recognize the woman staring back at me, because she looks like the girl I used to be before I learned that trust is just another word for betrayal, and love is just another weapon people use to hurt you. Before I understood that family legacy can be a death sentence as easily as it can be a crown. The dress is one of 3 nice things I own, salvaged from my old life in a moment of sentimentality. I've regretted 1,000 times, because keeping anything from before is dangerous, is foolish, is the kind of mistake that gets people killed. But I couldn't bring myself to throw it away because my mother bought it for me for my 20th birthday, just months before she died. And wearing it now feels like bringing her ghost with me into whatever confrontation is about to unfold in Dante's private kingdom, where he can do absolutely anything to me without witnesses or consequences, or anyone to even know I was here. The text message that arrived this morning was simple and direct. Just an address and a time and the words, "Wear something that makes you feel powerful," in Italian. And I've been turning that phrasing over in my mind all day, trying to decode whether it's a kindness, giving me armor in the form of clothing that makes me feel strong, or whether it's a test to see if I'll show up at all, to see if I trust him even a fraction as much as he claims to want me to see if I'm brave enough or stupid enough to walk into the lion's den dressed as anything other than prey. I push open the heavy wooden door that probably costs more than most cars, stepping into a space that takes my breath away despite my determination to remain unimpressed by displays of wealth and power. Because the restaurant is exactly the kind of place my father would have loved. Old-world elegance meeting new-world sophistication, with exposed brick walls that speak of history and crystal chandeliers that whisper of money, with enough space between tables that conversations remain private, and enough shadows in the corners that deals can be made without prying eyes witnessing the handshakes that seal them. The restaurant is completely empty, except for a single table set in the center of the room, like a stage or an altar, or perhaps a sacrificial platform. And the white tablecloth seems to glow in the candlelight that flickers from what must be 50 candles arranged around this space, creating an atmosphere that's equal parts romantic and unsettling. Like I've walked into a scene from a movie where the beautiful setting only serves to highlight the danger of what's about to unfold within it. Dante rises from his chair as I approach, and for the first time I see him in casual clothes, or what passes for casual when you're a man who probably has his underwear custom-made, dark slacks that fit him like they were painted on, and a black button-down with the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that are far more muscular than I expected, marked with scars that tell stories of a life lived violently. And somehow the absence of a tie and jacket makes him look younger and more dangerous simultaneously, like he's dropped a layer of civilization to show me the predator underneath who usually hides behind expensive suits and practiced charm. "Alessia," he says, and my name in his mouth still sounds like possession, like prayer, like promise. And I watch his eyes travel over me with an appreciation that's both flattering and unnerving, because I'm not used to being looked at like this anymore. Like I'm something precious and dangerous, and worth the considerable effort it must have taken to arrange this entire elaborate evening. "You look like a queen returned from exile, like power dressed in red silk, like everything I've been imagining since the moment you walked away from my table, and I realized I'd just met someone who might actually be capable of understanding the weight of the crown I wear." His words should sound ridiculous, should sound like lines from a bad romance novel, but instead they land with the weight of sincerity, because there's no smirk on his face, no indication that he's playing games or trying to manipulate me with flattery. Just honest appreciation mixed with something that looks almost like relief, like he's been waiting a long time to meet someone he doesn't have to pretend with, and finding me has been the answer to a question he didn't know how to ask. "You know who I am," I say, skipping past pleasantries and small talk, because Marcus's revelation last night combined with this entire elaborate setup has made it clear that we're done pretending, done dancing around the truth, done with the careful lies we've been telling each other and ourselves. "You've known since that first night, maybe even before I walked into Vincenzo's if your information network is as good as your reputation suggests. So the question isn't whether you know who I am, but rather what you intend to do with that information. Whether I'm your guest tonight or your prisoner. Whether this dinner is a negotiation or an execution dressed up in candlelight and expensive wine." "Come sit down," he says instead of answering directly, gesturing to the chair across from him, with a grace that reminds me he was born into this life just as I was, raised with the same lessons about posture and presentation, and the importance of never showing weakness, even when you're bleeding internally. And let me feed you while we talk about complicated things like identity and survival, and the strange fate that brought us together at exactly the moment when we both needed someone who understands the particular loneliness of carrying a legacy that's equal parts gift and curse. I should refuse, should demand answers before I give him anything else. But there's something in his expression that makes me trust him, despite every logical reason not to. Some fundamental recognition that whispers he's telling the truth about understanding my loneliness because he carries his own version of it. So I cross the remaining distance and let him pull out my chair with old-fashioned courtesy that my father would have approved of, settling into the seat while he returns to his own, and immediately pours wine that's probably older than both of us, combined into crystal glasses that catch the candlelight and throw rainbows across the white tablecloth. I didn't know who you were that first night, he begins, and I watch his hands as he speaks because they're expressive in a way his face isn't, moving through the air like he's conducting an orchestra or casting spells. I knew you were someone, knew that women don't speak Sicilian with that particular accent, unless they grew up in specific circles, knew that your posture and bearing suggested training that ordinary families don't provide their daughters, but I didn't make the connection to the Romanos until later, until I had my people dig deeper and found old photographs from before your family's tragedy, society pages and charity events where you appeared with your parents looking like the princess of an empire that seemed invincible right up until the moment it burned. The mention of my family's death, stated so plainly without euphemism or careful dancing around the reality of what happened, makes something crack open in my chest that I've been keeping sealed shut for 5 years, and I take a long drink of wine to cover the fact that my hands are shaking slightly, that hearing someone acknowledge the truth of that night out loud has affected me more than I want to admit. Because for 5 years, I've been the only person who knows what I lost, the only witness to my own grief. And having someone else see it and name it feels both violating and strangely relieving. So you know everything, I say, when I trust my voice to stay steady. When I can look at him without the threat of tears that would be the ultimate weakness in a moment that demands I stay strong and sharp and fully in control of myself. You know about the attack, about how I ran while my family died, about how I've been hiding like a coward for 5 years, while whoever ordered their deaths probably assumed I burned with the house, or got buried in some unmarked grave. And now you're sitting here looking at me like I'm something special when we both know I'm just the survivor of a massacre who's been too afraid to find out the truth about who wanted my family dead and why. You're not a coward, Dante says with such conviction that I almost believe him, his eyes holding mine with an intensity that makes it impossible to look away, even though I want to, even though the weight of his attention feels like too much. You were 20 years old, and your entire world exploded in one night, and you did what you had to do to survive, which is crawl through broken glass and flames and get out alive while everyone you loved was dying around you. And survival isn't cowardice, Alessia. Survival is the bravest thing you can choose when death would be so much easier, when giving up would be so much simpler than facing another day, carrying the weight of grief and guilt and trauma that would break most people into pieces too small to ever put back together. His words hit something deep inside me that I've been trying to ignore, some part of me that's been calling myself a coward for 5 years. That's been convinced I should have stayed and fought even though I was one girl against trained killers. That's been certain my survival was somehow shameful when everyone else in my family had the courage to die. And hearing someone else, especially someone like Dante who understands violence and loss and the impossible choices that come with living in our world, tell me that surviving was brave instead of cowardly, makes tears finally spill over, despite my best efforts to contain them. He's around the table before I fully register him moving, pulling me up from my chair and into his arms with a gentleness that contradicts everything I know about him, about men like him, about the world we both inhabit where softness is weakness and showing emotion is painting a target on your vulnerability. But his arms around me feel safe instead of threatening, feel like shelter instead of cage, and I find myself pressing my face against his chest and breathing in his scent of expensive cologne and something underneath that's purely him, purely male, purely dangerous in ways that have nothing to do with violence and everything to do with the way my body responds to his nearness. I've been so alone, I whisper against his shirt. The admission torn from somewhere deep inside me where I've been keeping all my secrets locked away. So tired of being afraid all the time, so exhausted from pretending to be someone I'm not. And I don't even know if I remember who I really am anymore because I've been playing this role for so long that maybe the frightened waitress is who I actually became, and the girl I used to be died in that house along with everyone else. She didn't die, Dante says into my hair, his voice rough with emotion. I didn't expect him to be capable of feeling. She's right here, crying in my arms because she finally found someone safe enough to break down in front of. Someone who won't use her tears as a weapon or see her vulnerability as an opportunity. And I know you don't know me well enough to trust that yet, but I swear to you on my family's name and my own blood that I will protect you from whoever did this, will help you find the truth about that night, will stand beside you when you decide what you want to do with that truth once we uncover it. I pull back enough to look up at him, searching his face for signs of deception or manipulation, or the kind of empty promises that men make when they want something from women they're trying to seduce. But all I see is sincerity mixed with a fierce protectiveness that makes my heart stutter in my chest. Makes me wonder if maybe, possibly, I've finally found someone who sees me as more than a victim to be pitied, or an asset to be used, or a problem to be eliminated. Why? I ask, because I need to understand his motivation, need to know what he's getting out of this besides the satisfaction of solving a mystery. Why would you help me when my family's tragedy isn't your responsibility? When getting involved in investigating a 5-year-old massacre will only bring you problems and complications, and potentially make enemies of whoever was powerful enough to take down the Romanos in the first place? Because my family was supposed to protect yours that night, he says, and the words land like a bomb between us, exploding everything I thought I understood about that night, and my family's death, and the alliances that were supposed to keep us safe. My father received warnings about the attack, intelligence that suggested someone was moving against the Romanos, and he dismissed it as rumors, as paranoia, as the kind of gossip that circulates constantly in our world. And by the time he realized the threat was real, by the time he sent men to help, your house was already burning, and your family was already gone, and you had already disappeared into the night like a ghost. And he carried that guilt until the day he died 3 years ago, carried the knowledge that his failure to act had cost his closest ally everything. The revelation that Dante's family knew something was coming, that they had information that might have saved my parents if they'd taken it seriously, should make me furious, should make me hate him by extension. But instead I feel a strange sense of understanding, because I know better than most that in our world, intelligence is always flowing, warnings are constantly issued, and it's impossible to know which threats are real and which are misdirection until it's too late. And blaming the Salvatores for not preventing something they didn't fully understand feels like misplaced anger when the real blame belongs to whoever actually ordered the attack. So this is about redemption? I say, trying to categorize what's happening between us, trying to fit it into a box that makes sense. You're helping me because you feel guilty, because your father felt guilty, because the Salvatores owe a debt to the Romanos that can never actually be repaid, because my family is dead and nothing you do will bring them back. No, Dante says firmly, his hands coming up to cut my face with a tenderness that makes my breath catch. This started as guilt. Maybe. Started as a sense of obligation when I realized who you were. But that's not why I'm standing here looking at you like you're the answer to questions I didn't know I was asking. That's not why I arranged this entire evening just to have a few hours alone with you, where we could be honest without the performance we both put on for the rest of the world. That's not why every instinct I possess is screaming at me that you're mine to protect, mine to keep, mine to stand beside regardless of what comes next. His intensity should frighten me, should send me running back into the shadows where I've been hiding. But instead I find myself leaning into his touch, tilting my face up toward his like a flower seeking sunlight. And when he kisses me, it's nothing like I expected. There's no violence in it, no domination, just a sweetness that feels almost reverent, like he's handling something precious that might break if he's not careful. And I kiss him back with 5 years of loneliness and longing pouring out of me. 5 years of being untouched and unseen and completely alone in my fear and my grief. The kiss deepens and transforms as we stop being careful with each other. As the restraint we've both been maintaining finally snaps under the weight of attraction and recognition, and the intoxicating feeling of finally finding someone who understands the darkness you carry without flinching away from it. And his hands move from my face to my waist, pulling me closer until there's no space between us, until I can feel every hard plane of his body against mine, and the evidence of how much he wants me pressing against my hip in a way that should probably alarm me but instead makes heat pool low in my belly. We break apart, breathing hard, and I watch his pupils dilate until his eyes are almost entirely black. Watch the careful control he usually maintains slip enough for me to see the raw want underneath. And I make a decision that's probably insane but feels more right than anything has felt in 5 years. I take his hand and place it over my racing heart and whisper in Sicilian, "I don't know if this is smart or safe or anything other than two broken people finding comfort in each other's damage. But I know I'm tired of being afraid. Tired of being alone. And if I'm going to trust someone with the truth of who I am and what I'm carrying, it might as well be you." What happens next unfolds with the kind of inevitability that feels like fate or destiny or whatever word we use when we want to pretend we're not making choices that will change everything. And when Dante leads me through a door at the back of the restaurant into what's clearly his private apartment, all exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan like a kingdom spread out below us, I follow without hesitation because I've already decided to jump, and falling is just the natural consequence of that choice. He takes his time with me, removing my red dress with hands that shake slightly despite his reputation for steady control in all situations, kissing every inch of skin he reveals like he's memorizing me, like I'm something rare and valuable that he's been given temporary custody of, and he wants to appreciate every moment before I'm taken away. And I respond with an abandon I didn't know I was capable of, letting go of 5 years of careful control and rigid self-protection, and allowing myself to just feel, to just want, to just exist in this moment without worrying about consequences or tomorrow or anything beyond the sensation of his mouth on my skin and his hands learning the geography of my body. When we finally come together, it's with the intensity that borders on overwhelming, like we're trying to crawl inside each other's skin, like we're seeking some kind of fusion that will make us complete. And I hear myself making sounds I didn't know I could make, saying things in a mixture of English and Italian and Sicilian that might be prayers or might be curses or might be confessions of needs I've been denying for so long that finally expressing them feels like liberation and terror wrapped into one explosive package. Afterwards, lying in his massive bed with Manhattan glittering outside the windows, and his arm heavy across my waist like he's afraid I'll disappear if he stops touching me, I feel simultaneously more vulnerable and more safe than I've felt in 5 years. And when he whispers against my neck that he meant what he said about protecting me, about helping me find the truth, about standing beside me when I face whatever demons are waiting in my past, I believe him with a certainty that defies logic and probably betrays how desperately I want it to be true. "There's something I need to tell you," he says, after a long silence filled only with our breathing synchronizing. "Something I learned today that I was planning to tell you over dinner, before we got distracted by honesty and attraction, and the general impossibility of keeping our hands off each other." The serious tone in his voice makes anxiety spike in my chest, makes me tense against him, despite not wanting to ruin this perfect moment with whatever harsh reality he's about to introduce. And I feel him tighten his arm around me like he's trying to keep me from fleeing before he can explain, trying to hold me in place long enough to hear what he has to say, even if it's something I don't want to know. "I know who ordered your family's death," Dante says quietly, and the words seem to suck all the oxygen out of the room. "I've known for 2 days, since the moment I confirmed your identity and put my entire organization on finding answers, and Alessia, The truth is worse than you imagined because it wasn't an enemy who wanted the Romanos eliminated. It wasn't a rival family or business competitor or someone from outside your circle. It was someone you trusted. Someone who sat at your dinner table and smiled at your mother and shook your father's hand while planning their execution. And I need you to prepare yourself because when I tell you the name, everything you thought you understood about that night and your family's place in our world is going to shatter into pieces that might be impossible to put back together. I sit up despite his attempt to keep me in place, pulling the sheet around myself like armor because suddenly I'm aware of how naked I am in every sense of the word, how exposed I've made myself to a man I barely know who's about to tell me something that will change everything. And I look at him with my heart pounding so hard I can hear it in my ears and say in a voice that doesn't sound like mine, Tell me right now who killed my family because I've been running from this truth for 5 years, and I'm done hiding, done being afraid. So whatever name you're about to say, just say it, and let me finally know who I need to destroy. Dante sits up beside me, his face grave in the ambient light from the city filtering through the windows, and he takes my hand in both of his like he's trying to anchor me for what's coming. And then he says a name that makes my entire world tilt sideways because it's not possible. It can't be true, except the certainty in his eyes tells me it is true, and my mind is already racing through memories and moments that suddenly take on sinister new meaning when viewed through the lens of betrayal. And I realize with a clarity that feels like ice water through my veins that I'm about to have to choose between the girl I was, who would have handled this revelation in one way, and the woman I've become who might choose something entirely different. And Dante is watching me with an expression that suggests he'll support whatever I decide, but also that he's prepared for the possibility that what I decide might be vengeance violent enough to stain both our hands with blood that won't wash clean. I wake up in Dante Salvatore's bed, wearing his shirt, and my own confusion like a second skin. And the morning light filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows shows me a side of Manhattan I've never seen from this height. The city looks almost peaceful from up here, almost harmless, which is exactly the kind of lie that gets people killed in our world. And I'm acutely aware that I've just spent the night in the arms of a man who dropped a bomb on my understanding of reality with a single name that I'm still trying to process, still trying to reconcile with the memories I have of a man who was like an uncle to me, who taught me to play chess and brought me gifts from his travels and smiled at me across dinner tables while apparently planning the systematic destruction of everyone I loved. Marco De Luca, my father's closest friend and business partner, the man who stood as my godfather at my christening and who held me when I cried at my grandmother's funeral, the man whose own children played with me throughout our childhood, and who always had a kind word and a gentle hand for the Romano daughter who adored him like family, that Marco De Luca orchestrated the attack that killed my parents and burned my house to the ground, while I crawled through smoke and flames and the sounds of gunfire that still echo in my nightmares when I let my guard down long enough to sleep deeply. Dante is already awake beside me, propped up on one elbow watching me with an expression that suggests he's been studying my face for a while, cataloging my reactions as consciousness returns, and the weight of last night's revelation settles over me like a shroud, and there's concern in his dark eyes mixed with something that might be apprehension, because he's just told me something that could send me spiraling into darkness or violence or a breakdown that fractures me beyond repair. And he doesn't yet know me well enough to predict which way I'll fall when pushed this close to the edge of my capacity to process trauma. "You didn't sleep much," he observes in Italian, his voice still rough with sleep in a way that would be attractive if I had any mental space left for attraction, after spending half the night staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of betrayal so profound it rewrites my entire history. I could feel you thinking beside me, your mind so loud I could almost hear the questions circling like sharks. And I wanted to pull you back to me, to offer comfort or distraction or whatever you needed, but you seemed like you needed space to process, so I gave you that instead. "Marco De Luca," I say, testing the name on my tongue like poison, like a curse, like an explanation for 5 years of running and hiding, and never understanding why someone would want my family eliminated, because we weren't ambitious enough to threaten anyone, weren't positioned to take territory that belonged to others. We're content with our corner of the empire and our alliances that kept us safe, or so we thought until the night those alliances revealed themselves to be made of paper and lies. You're absolutely certain it was him. Your intelligence is solid enough that you'd stake your reputation on it. Because if you're wrong, then I'm about to destroy an innocent man. And if you're right, then I'm about to have to figure out how to destroy someone who's spent the last 5 years consolidating power and building alliances that make him nearly untouchable. I'm certain, Dante says with the kind of absolute conviction that comes from having access to information networks most people can't even imagine, from having the resources to dig into secrets that others thought were buried deep enough to never surface. My people found financial records showing payments made to the team that hit your house, communications that reference the Romano problem and its permanent solution, and testimony from one of the shooters who's currently enjoying our hospitality in a location where he's highly motivated to tell the truth about who hired him and why. And every piece of evidence points back to DeLuca, to a plan he'd been developing for months before that night, waiting for the right moment when your father's guard would be down and the Salvatore family would be too distracted with our own internal issues to respond quickly enough to make a difference. The confirmation that this betrayal was premeditated, that it wasn't some sudden decision made in anger or fear, but rather a calculated move that Marco planned and executed with the same careful attention he brought to every business deal, makes my stomach turn with a nausea that has nothing to do with the expensive wine we drank last night, and everything to do with the realization that I never knew him at all, that the man I thought I knew was a mask covering a monster capable of murdering his best friend and that friend's wife, and willing to kill their daughter too, if he'd managed to find me in the chaos. Why? I ask. Because motivation matters. Because understanding what drove Marco to this level of betrayal might help me understand how I missed the signs that must have been there. How my father missed the warning signals that should have been obvious to a man who'd survived decades in a world where trust is currency, and betrayal is the coin everyone trades in eventually. What did my family have that he wanted badly enough to kill for? What possible reason could justify destroying people who loved him, who trusted him, who would have given him anything he asked for if he'd just asked, instead of taking it with blood and fire? Dante sits up fully, his bare chest a distraction I can't afford right now, but can't help noticing anyway, because apparently my body has decided that even in crisis, it wants to be aware of the man who made me feel things last night that I haven't felt in years, who touched me like I was precious instead of damaged, who looked at me like I was powerful instead of broken. And I watch him run his hands through his dark hair in a gesture that suggests he's trying to figure out how to explain something complicated, something that might make me hate him by association, or might make me understand the darker corners of the world we both inhabit. Your father controlled the port operations that Marco wanted for himself, Dante finally says, his voice careful like he's navigating a minefield. And more importantly, your father had documentation of deals that Marco had made outside the family's knowledge, partnerships with groups that would have gotten him killed if the commission found out. And Marco believed your father was going to expose him, was going to bring evidence to the other families that would result in Marco's execution for violations of territory and protocol. And rather than face judgment or try to make amends, he decided to eliminate the threat and take the ports for himself in one move that would solve all his problems if he could just make sure there were no witnesses left to contradict whatever story he told about what happened. The explanation makes a horrible kind of sense, fitting pieces together that I've been carrying for 5 years without understanding how they connected. And I remember now the tension I sensed between my father and Marco in the weeks before the attack. The closed-door meetings that ended with my father's face tight with anger or disappointment. The way Marco stopped coming to Sunday dinners and started sending his wife and children alone, with excuses about work keeping him away. And I realize my father knew, suspected at least. And Marco killed him before he could act on that knowledge, before he could bring his evidence to people who would have ensured Marco paid for his betrayal with his life. I was supposed to die too, I say. And it's not a question because the answer is obvious. I was a loose end that needed tying up. A potential witness who might have overheard something or found something or simply grown up and started asking questions that Marco couldn't afford to have answered. He sent people to find me, didn't he? Sent them to search the house after the fire was contained, and when they couldn't find my body, he probably assumed I'd burned beyond recognition or got buried in the collapse. But there's been a part of him all these years wondering if I survived. If I'm out there somewhere waiting to come back and destroy him the way he destroyed my family. Yes, Dante confirms. And the moment word spreads that you're alive, that you're here in New York, under my protection, he'll have to make a move, because letting you live means living with the constant threat that you'll find evidence or testimony, or simply convince enough people that his story about that night doesn't hold up under scrutiny. And men like Marco don't live with threats, they eliminate them. Which is why I've already moved your belongings from your apartment to a secure location and assigned a security team to shadow you whenever you leave this building. Because I'm not going to let him finish what he started 5 years ago. Not while I'm still breathing. The presumption that he gets to make decisions about my life and safety without consulting me first should make me furious. Should trigger all my carefully maintained independence and my resistance to being controlled by anyone after 5 years of answering to no one but myself. But instead I feel a strange mixture of relief and frustration, because part of me is grateful that someone else is finally sharing the burden of keeping me alive, while another part resents the implication that I can't protect myself, that I need a man with resources and power to stand between me and the danger that's been circling me since the night I ran. You should have asked me before moving my things, I say, trying to maintain some sense of agency in a situation that's rapidly spiraling beyond my control, trying to establish that I'm not a damsel to be rescued, or a possession to be protected, but rather a partner in whatever comes next. Someone with opinions and capabilities, and the right to make my own choices even if those choices involve risk. You should have asked me what I wanted instead of deciding for me like I'm a child who can't assess danger or make rational decisions about my own survival. You're right, Dante says, and the immediate acknowledgement of his overreach surprises me, because men like him don't usually apologize for anything. Don't usually admit fault or accept criticism. I should have treated you like the equal partner I claimed I wanted you to be instead of defaulting to the protective instincts that tell me to lock you in a tower and throw away the key until every threat is neutralized. But Alessia, you need to understand that knowing you're in danger and having the resources to mitigate that danger creates a responsibility I can't ignore. And I'd rather have you angry at me for overstepping than have you dead because I respected your independence more than I valued your life. His honesty diffuses my anger more effectively than any justification could, and I find myself moving closer to him instead of pulling away. Drawn by the genuine concern in his expression and the understanding that his actions come from care rather than control, from a desire to keep me safe rather than a need to dominate me. And I reach out to touch his face with fingers that tremble slightly, because everything is moving so fast. Because 24 hours ago, I was a waitress with no complications beyond making rent, and now I'm a Mafia princess, returned from the dead with a target on my back, and a dangerous man in my bed whose promising protection I'm not sure I should accept. I don't know how to do this, I admit, letting him see the vulnerability I usually hide behind walls of self-sufficiency and carefully maintain distance. I don't know how to let someone else help carry the weight I've been carrying alone. Don't know how to trust that your protection won't come with strings attached or expectations I can't meet. Don't know how to be the girl I was before while also being the woman I've become, and I'm terrified that if I let myself depend on you, and you fail me the way everyone else has failed me, I won't survive it, won't be able to pick up the pieces and keep going, because I'm already held together with borrowed strength and sheer stubborn will. Then don't depend on me, Dante says, pulling me against his chest and wrapping his arms around me with a security that makes tears threaten, despite my determination not to cry anymore, not to show weakness when I need to be strong. Stand beside me instead. Work with me as a partner, rather than letting me work for you as a protector. Use my resources but make your own decisions about how we proceed. And if I fail you, if I prove unworthy of the trust you're considering giving me, then you'll destroy me the same way you're going to destroy Marco De Luca. because I'd rather die by your hand than live knowing I betrayed you the way he betrayed your father." The vow is dramatic and probably excessive, but it resonates with something deep inside me that recognizes the sincerity beneath the theatrical delivery, that understands he's offering me not just protection but partnership, not just his resources but his loyalty, and the weight of that offering is almost more than I can process, because I've been alone for so long that having someone volunteer to stand beside me feels like a gift I don't know how to accept without suspecting hidden costs. Our conversation is interrupted by sharp knocking on the bedroom door, the kind of urgent sound that suggests crisis or emergency, or news that can't wait for more convenient timing. And I watch Dante's expression shift from vulnerable to dangerous in the space between one breath and the next, the softness he was showing me disappearing behind the mask of command that he wears for everyone else. And he calls out permission to enter in Italian, while simultaneously pulling the sheet up to ensure I'm covered, because apparently even in emergencies, he's concerned about my modesty. Marcus enters, the same Marcus who revealed he knew my real name, and I realize now that he's not just a host at Vincenzo's, but rather one of Dante's people, someone planted in that restaurant specifically to gather intelligence or provide security, or perhaps both, and the recognition that I've been under surveillance without knowing it should bother me more than it does, but I'm too focused on the expression on his face that suggests whatever news he's bringing is bad enough to warrant interrupting his boss's morning after. "We have a situation," Marcus says in rapid Italian that confirms my suspicion that he's much more than he pretended to be. De Luca knows she's alive. Someone leaked information from last night's security sweep, and he's calling an emergency meeting of the commission for tonight, claiming he has evidence of Salvatore family overreach and violations of territorial agreements, and we believe he's going to use the meeting to demand they force you to turn her over to him for protection as her godfather, which gives him legal cover to eliminate her while making us look like the aggressors if we refuse. The news hits me like cold water, shocking me fully into the present moment and stripping away any lingering softness from the night before, because I understand the game Marco is playing. He's using the commission's own rules and protocols against us, positioning himself as the concerned godfather worried about my well-being, while painting Dante as the dangerous outsider who's kidnapped or coerced me. And if the commission sides with Marco, then Dante will be forced to choose between defying the governing body of families that maintains order in our world or handing me over to the man who wants me dead. "How long do we have?" Dante asks, his voice cold and calculating, already running through strategies and contingencies, already planning moves and countermoves in a game where my life is the prize and the rules are written by men who see women as property to be distributed according to their whims and political calculations. 8 hours, Marcus replies. The meeting is set for 6 o'clock at the Neutral Ground Warehouse in Red Hook, full commission attendance required, and De Luca has already briefed most of the other families on his version of events, which means we're walking in with opinion already turned against us, unless we can present compelling counter-evidence or a strategy that flips the narrative in our favor. I watch Dante's mind work through the problem, see him analyzing angles and assessing risks, and I realize that he's trying to figure out how to keep me safe while also maintaining his position and authority, trying to find a solution that doesn't require him to sacrifice one for the other. But I already know what needs to happen, already understand that there's only one way to win this particular game, because I learned strategy at my father's knee, and I know that sometimes the best move is the one your opponent doesn't expect. "I'll go to the meeting," I say, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through my system, despite knowing that walking into a room full of Mafia bosses is probably the most dangerous thing I could do. I'll stand in front of the commission and tell them exactly who I am, and what Marco did, and why they should believe me instead of him, and if they don't believe me, if they side with him anyway because he's been cultivating their favor for 5 years while I've been gone, then at least I'll have tried. At least I'll have fought instead of running again, and that has to count for something even if it costs me everything. "Absolutely not," Dante says immediately, his protective instincts overriding his strategic mind. "You're not walking into a room full of men who might decide your fate based on politics rather than justice, who might hand you over to Marco just to maintain the peace or avoid complications. And I won't risk your life on the possibility that they'll do the right thing when our world is built on doing whatever serves power, rather than whatever serves righteousness. It's not your decision to make, I counter, standing up from the bed with the sheet wrapped around me like armor, feeling strength flowing back into my spine and steel returning to my voice. This is my fight, my family, my revenge, and I've been running from it for 5 years, but I'm done running, done hiding, done letting fear dictate my choices. And if I'm going to reclaim my name and my legacy and my right to exist in this world without constantly looking over my shoulder, then I need to face the commission and make them see me not as a victim to be pitied or a problem to be solved, but as a Romano who survived when she should have died, and who's come back to demand justice for what was taken from her. The argument that follows is intense and passionate, with Dante laying out all the ways this plan could go wrong and me countering with all the reasons why it's the only move that makes sense. And somewhere in the middle of our debate, I realize that we're fighting like partners who disagree rather than like a protector and his charge. That he's treating my opinions with respect even as he argues against them. And that shift in dynamic feels significant even as we're caught in crisis mode. If you're going, then I'm going with you, Dante finally concedes, recognizing that I'm not going to back down, that I've made my decision and nothing he says will change it. And we're going prepared with every piece of evidence we can gather in the next 8 hours, with testimony from the shooter who's been so helpful in our interrogations, with financial records that show Marco's payments and his unauthorized partnerships, with everything we need to bury him so completely that the commission has no choice but to side with us, or look complicit in covering up the murder of one of their own families. And if it's not enough, I ask, needing to know that he's prepared for the possibility that we walk into that warehouse and lose, that we present our case and the commission decides that maintaining peace with Marco is more valuable than delivering justice for the Romanos. If they choose him over us, if they decide I'm more trouble than I'm worth, what happens then? Dante crosses the room to stand in front of me, his hands coming up to frame my face with a gentleness that contradicts the violence I can see building behind his eyes. The promise of retribution if anyone tries to take me from him. And he says with absolute conviction, then we go to war, and I burn down everyone who sided against you until there's nothing left but ashes, and the memory of what happens when people underestimate a Romano woman and the man who's claimed her as his, and I don't care if it costs me my position or my empire or my life, because some things are worth fighting for even when the odds are impossible. And you, Alessia Romano, are worth every battle I'll have to wage to keep you safe and deliver the justice your family deserves. His declaration should sound insane, should sound like the kind of dramatic overstatement that people make in moments of passion but don't actually mean when reality sets in. But I look into his eyes and see the truth of it. See that he means every word, that he's prepared to sacrifice everything he's built for a woman he's known less than a week. And the realization that someone values me that much, that someone sees me as worth defending even at catastrophic cost, breaks something open inside me that's been closed since the night I lost everything. Then let's go prepare for war, I say, rising, on my toes to kiss him with a fierceness that surprises us both, pouring 5 years of suppressed rage and grief and determination into the contact. Because I'm done being the girl who ran, done being the victim who hid, and it's time for Marco De Luca and everyone who helped him, or stayed silent, or benefited from my family's destruction, to learn that the Romano daughter survived. And she's coming for them with the full force of her fury and the backing of the most dangerous man in New York, and together we're going to reshape this world into something that remembers what happens when you betray the wrong family. I marry Dante Salvatore in a private ceremony 6 months after his proposal, standing in the rebuilt study of my family's house with Marcus as witness, and the ghosts of my parents as silent attendants. And when he slides the ring onto my finger, I feel the weight of 2 families joining, 2 legacies merging, 2 people who were alone finding in each other the home they'd both been searching for. And I think this, finally, is what belonging feels like. Not the absence of danger or the guarantee of safety, but rather the presence of someone who sees all of you. The light and the dark, the strength and the fragility, the past and the potential, and chooses to stand beside you anyway. chooses to face whatever comes next together, rather than forcing you to face it alone. Sometimes late at night when Manhattan glitters outside our windows, like a kingdom made of stars and broken dreams. When Dante is asleep beside me, and I lie awake thinking about everything that brought me to this moment. I wonder what my parents would think of the woman I've become, whether they'd be proud of how I survived, or horrified by what survival required of me. Whether they'd approve of Dante or worry that I've chosen a life too similar to the one that killed them. And I like to believe they'd understand that this is the only life I know how to live, the only world I know how to navigate, and that finding someone to navigate it with me is perhaps the best I could hope for in a universe that took everything from me, and then somehow, impossibly, gave me something back. The waitress who spoke Sicilian and insulted a Mafia boss feels like a lifetime ago. Feels like a character I played in someone else's story. But I'm grateful to her, too. Grateful that she had the courage to stop hiding even when hiding had kept her alive. Grateful that she chose to be seen by exactly the right person at exactly the right moment. Because sometimes, fate is just the word we use for the million small choices that lead us to where we're supposed to be. And every decision I made from the moment I opened my mouth and responded to Dante's insult led me here. To this life. To this love. To this understanding that home is not a place you return to, but rather a person you build with. Brick by careful brick. Truth by vulnerable truth. Until what you've created together is strong enough to withstand whatever storms come battering at your walls. I am Alessia Romano Salvatore, daughter of murdered parents and wife of a dangerous man, leader of a family I never wanted and exactly where I'm supposed to be, broken and healing and learning that maybe those things can coexist, that you can carry your scars and your strength in the same hands, that you can honor your dead while building toward your future, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is not running from the darkness but rather turning to face it with someone who loves you enough to stand in the shadows beside you, holding your hand while you remember how to find your own light.